Welcome to Journalist Roundtable. I'm Phil Beckman. Today we are joined by Lindsay Weber, a reporter with the Morning Call in Allentown, Aliya Schneider, a reporter with the Philadelphia Inquirer, and Ivey DeJesus, a reporter with PennLive Patriot News in Harrisburg. Ivey, you've been covering a recent shooting this past weekend in New York. What happened?
Thank you, Phil. Yes, on Saturday morning, we got the call that there was an active shooting situation at the UPMC Memorial Hospital, which is in West Manchester Township, just outside the city of York. And as per usual, media converged, and we soon find out that there were injuries and possibly fatalities. It's an interesting situation these days. These kinds of, mass shooting situations are really interesting these days because as media, we really can't go with anything but the official word, right, from authorities and whoever's sort of handling the emergency situation. But social media in the meantime is just going crazy with the amount of information that's coming out, even from people inside the hospital. So I always find these situations a really good test of our comfort level with what we go with. But we're pretty conservative in terms of what we're going to rely on. So we relied on the authorities for a good chunk of the early part of this. But we had a situation where a 49-year-old man by the name of DeJesus Archangel Ortiz went into the hospital. He entered and was able to go straight to the ICU. And there he took several people hostage. He held a medical staff personnel at gunpoint, pointing a gun to her head. And an exchange of gunfire broke out between he and police. And in the end, there was one West York police officer who was fatally wounded, Andrew Duarte, who was just 30 years old, just turned 30. And then police also shot and killed Ortiz as well in the exchange. So it really underscores where the healthcare and hospital systems are these days in terms of providing their security. We've learned in the last couple of 5-6 days of reporting on this that there was a level of security there, but there were not metal detectors as many hospitals do have these days. And even those hospitals, they're confined to the emergency department. So there's still pretty much freedom of being able to walk into a hospital. I think it really raises that conversation of where do hospitals want to be in terms of the continuum of airports are so secure, courthouses are so secure, you can't walk into the state capitol without going through metal detectors. So it's developing and it's important, but and tragic as well. So,
have the police released any information about a possible motive?
What we've been able to piece together is that Archangel Ortiz had a loved one in the hospital, a woman who we don't know if it was the wife or a girlfriend. We've heard different reports, but that she died at some point last week. She died, and whatever happened, it triggered him to perhaps think that maybe the medical staff or a particular doctor didn't handle it well, and he, the motive in his mind obviously was to go back into the hospital with a semi-automatic weapon and zip ties and marched into the ICU. So that, may or may not be a motive. We've also done stories that where we've learned that he had lifelong mental health issues. A former girlfriend told me that he suffered from depression, debilitating depression at times. So that's something yet that, adds a different sort of tone to the story. A lot of people have raised the idea of if he had mental health issues and to what level was this known, yet he was able to get a gun. So we're pursuing that angle as well.
Lindsay, what are some of the key stories you've been covering this week?
Sure. So I've been looking at just in general some of the impacts of federal immigration policy here in the Lehigh Valley, where we have a pretty significant immigrant population and a pretty significant foreign-born population. So there's been a push in some of the major cities in the Lehigh Valley, which is also just happens to be where a lot of the immigrant population happens to live. There's been a push for some of the cities to pass what activists are calling a welcoming cities ordinance. It seems to me that they're, very much trying to differentiate this from the idea of a sanctuary city. But the policy is that, police and city employees will not willingly hand over information or collaborate with federal immigration authorities unless those authorities have, legally binding warrant or some kind of judicial order. So a couple of weeks ago in Allentown, I was at the city council meeting where several dozen activists spoke in favor of this ordinance and spoke to, some of the fears in the immigrant community and really, tried to make the case that passing a welcoming cities ordinance would, contribute to the security of those residents and, give them a sense that, their local governments were kind of looking out for them regardless of, whether they were in the country in an authorized way or not. So Allentown did pass that ordinance after, several hours of comment and debate. It seemed that, the mayor was initially going to oppose this ordinance, but with an amendment that kind of took out these requirements to comply with a nonprofit called Welcoming America. They are kind of a nonprofit behind some of the cities that are passing this ordinance. And the ordinance was going to require them to kind of collaborate with Welcoming America. That was changed to simply a suggestion. I think because of, legal concerns if the city was to not meet the requirements of this nonprofit. So that is now in effect in Allentown. And what we're hearing from, the police leaders in not just Allentown, but Bethlehem too, where this proposal came forward was that the policy of many of these cities' police departments is already to, not kind of proactively engage with federal authorities. And the reasoning there is, immigration enforcement is the responsibility of the federal government, and local government is, to address crime and issues in that local community, but not necessarily to address the federal issue of immigration. That being said, in both Bethlehem and Easton, city councils did not take up this ordinance. Both police chiefs in Bethlehem and Easton spoke out against this proposal, and there were a couple of different reasons for that. But one of them just being that it, in the view of Bethlehem's police chief, Michelle Cott, it takes away kind of the ability for police officers to use their own discretion and instead, dictates, how police officers should correspond with federal immigration authorities without, giving them that ability to, I guess, make decisions based on their own judgment, but instead having this law kind of dictating what they should do in any given situation. So in both Bethlehem and Easton, despite a similar push from activists, these ordinances did not get on the table for a vote in those two cities.
Aliya, Philadelphia has long had a status as a sanctuary city. What is a sanctuary city, and does Mayor Parker's administration support that?
So a sanctuary city essentially limits cooperation with federal immigration enforcement. It's kind of a colloquial term that different cities and states use, that some places will flat out call themselves a sanctuary city or state. Other places have legislation that other people refer to it as such. Philadelphia has sanctuary protections in place, and they're still there, but immigration is not as big of an issue for Mayor Parker as it was for former Mayor Kenney. And so some people want more protections in Philadelphia. A lot of immigrants are scared right now. There's been ICE raids and, also on the backdrop of this is that just days into the new Trump administration, Philadelphia lost its director of immigration affairs. Amy Eusebio had resigned from that post just days into the Trump administration, and the city still hasn't replaced her. The city says that they're still seeking to interview someone. So there's a lot kind of at play right now in Philadelphia where there are protections, but people who are in the immigrant community and different advocates, they want the city to be doing more. And the current mayor is more willing to work with the Trump administration than the former mayor. She's more moderate than Mayor Kenny was. And so, it's kind of yet to be seen how Mayor Parker is going to be navigating this as we go on. But so far, she just has not embraced protecting immigrants in the same way that Philly saw under the last Trump administration, and just not having a director overseeing this department in the city just doesn't really help that uncertainty and fear that people feel around this topic.
Ivey, how have churches and other community facilities in your area been affected by some of the Trump administration's immigration policies?
Yeah, it's similar to these other geographic areas across the Commonwealth. We've seen a lot of the sort of the fallout radius is ever growing. I've talked to people who are afraid to go to church. They're afraid to send their kids to school. They're afraid to go to medical appointments. People are even afraid of this idea of sort of bogus ICE personnel, where they've heard stories in other states where usually men wearing what looks like to be a uniform, a law enforcement uniform, apprehending or encountering with Latino-looking people, whatever that means. So there's a lot of fear. There's just really a lot of fear. And there's a lot of uncertainty, too, because it's one thing to be completely, well-versed on immigration law, but it's just an area that has always been very dense and convoluted. And under the Trump administration now, it's changed so quickly. We just saw that a federal judge just now put an injunction against ICE operations and enforcement in places of worship, but that's only temporary. And the way that I read the order was that it only applies to the people who were the plaintiffs. And so, what does that mean? Does that mean that if you have a church in York Springs that's not clearly a plaintiff in that case, are you vulnerable? Another thing also that I wrote about this is back in the 90s, the Harrisburg region became a real destination point for Nepalese Bhutanese refugees who fled that country amid just really horrific persecution. If I remember this correctly, York has the fourth highest concentration of Bhutanese communities here in the United States. And these people are all here legally in their immigration papers, or they're refugees. But they're scared. They're also scared because they have seen this. They've seen government officials coming around to round people up, to send them to prison. I spoke to one of the leaders of the Bhutanese community who said, frankly, we're not only immigrants, but we're brown. We pass for Latinos. People mistake us for being Mexican, and so they're sort of swept in. They're swept into that whole sort of state of fear that a lot of people find themselves in.
Lindsay, you wrote about Congressman Ryan McKenzie issuing a statement critical of Northampton County's policy on cooperating with federal immigration enforcement. What were his concerns?
Right. So that's been kind of one of the central issues that we've seen with ICE operations here in the Lehigh Valley is ICE has actually been putting out some news releases, notifying the media that they are making arrests just outside of the Northampton County Jail. And they're kind of you know, alerting the media to, make a point that they disagree with Northampton County's policy on coordinating with ICE and federal immigration officials. There is a 2020 executive order in place in Northampton County that basically disallows agents of ICE to come physically into Northampton County property, whether it's the courthouse or the jail, to physically be on the property and make an arrest of someone being released from jail or someone that's in jail without, a legal warrant or a judicial order. And ICE has kind of tried to make the case that, this could potentially allow someone who, has both committed a crime and who is not in the country legally to, roam free on the streets. And so we actually heard on Friday, we received advance notice that ICE was going to be making an arrest outside of the Northampton County Jail. And so I was physically there with, one of our photographers, and we did see that there were around 9 agents of both ICE and a couple of other federal agencies standing outside of the doors of the jail. Someone comes out and ICE never actually released this person's identity, but they did, make an arrest without issue of that person who they said, had both committed a crime and was not legally in the country. And so both Ryan McKenzie, our freshman congressman who just recently, ousted our Democratic former Congresswoman Susan Wild here in the 7th District, obviously one of the most competitive in Pennsylvania, has also been critical of this Northampton County policy, called on the county executive to rescind that policy of not allowing ICE agents on the property, whereas the Northampton County executive, Lamont McClure, has made the case that, kind of balances the due process rights of someone who's being kept in jail with, the federal immigration authorities' right to, enforce those laws and make an arrest, because, they are able to, the county will, give advance notice, and those agents are able to, be physically outside of the prison or the jail, I'm sorry, when that person is released, but they, are just not allowed to physically step on that property. So that's kind of been an ongoing issue here in that county. It doesn't seem like our county executive, has any plans to rescind this executive order, but it also doesn't seem like Congressman McKenzie is ready to, stop criticizing this policy. And I think he'll continue to kind of try to bring awareness to this policy in the county that he and both ICE also does not agree with.
Aliya, you've recently covered some protests against President Trump and Elon Musk in Philadelphia and in Bucks County. What were they protesting?
Yeah, so on President's Day in Philadelphia and in Bucks County, there were protests against the Trump administration, and this was a day of protest across the country. There was a larger movement where a bunch of people were protesting in different locations that day. I was physically at the Philadelphia protest, and then my colleague Fallon Roth was in Bucks County. The Philadelphia one was much larger. It was a big march from City Hall where they had a rally, and then they went down to the art museum where the Rocky Steps are, for people who may know that area from the movies. And it was, it was a permanent protest. There were hundreds of people involved. In Bucks County, to my understanding, it was a smaller gathering. They were kind of on the side of the road. As cars were going by, they held up signs. It was a little bit more grassroots, to my understanding. And in Philadelphia and in Bucks County, what we saw was a lot of anger directed at not just Donald Trump, but Elon Musk as well. And a lot of the rhetoric was about, we don't want a king. We don't want kings in this country. I know Fallon saw someone who was dressed up like a king in Bucks to kind of mock Elon Musk and Donald Trump. In Philly, I saw countless signs about Elon Musk. A lot of people saying, we did not elect Elon Musk. For Trump, they're saying, this is America. We don't have kings. You're acting like a king. There was someone who was talking about his concerns about this idea of a king and not a Democratic leader here. And I asked, are you referencing Donald Trump or Elon Musk? And he said, take your pick. And so I think a huge difference from Trump's last administration is that Elon Musk is involved in such a big capacity, and that is really stirring people up. It's not just their anger at Trump, it's also at those around him and the richest man in the world who is right in there making decisions alongside the president. And I think an interesting component of this is that people are focusing on kings as this negative thing. And then the Trump administration kind of leans into that. I think it was just a few days later where the official White House posted on their social media an AI image of Trump as a king. And Trump said, it was either Trump or the White House said, long live the king, after he, tried to shut down the congestion pricing in New York. And so it's this tension between people on the left criticizing him as a king and him kind of embracing that. And I think that shows that, in a way, I think they see it as a way to kind of mock the left, which Trump likes doing. And I think another thing is that they don't really see it as a liability for him to come across as a king. I know that when I was reporting on the campaign trail, a lot of his followers expressed that they really like that he comes across as this like strong man, and they were like very loyal to him. And obviously this isn't everyone who voted for Trump, but his base really does kind of idolize him in a way. And there are people who told me, like, I wish Trump could be president forever. I want then his kids to be president. Like, people are just so enamored by him that they're not bothered by the idea of him being king. I think the question is going forward is, how much of that base is representative of the people who, I guess, decide to support Donald Trump in the election? And, how long is it going to last for him to kind of embrace that? And how far are they willing to go? And also, how far is the resistance going to go in a way that they will be heard?
Ivey recently wrote a profile of Kamika Campbell. Who is she?
Kamika Campbell is a longtime political advocate here in Pennsylvania. At one point, I don't know if she said it to herself or I said to her, you're the Stacey Abrams of Pennsylvania. The same way that Stacey Abrams really formed a ground game and energized the Black vote and the young vote, and really just across the board energized the more progressive and more Democratic-leaning voters in Georgia, the same way she did that. Kamika has been doing that here in Pennsylvania for a number of years, and she's getting some well-deserved recognition. She's gotten awards from the Chamber of Commerce and Critic, and she's been named Leader of the Year. So she is someone to keep, your eye on her. She's led a lot of sort of rallies against things that she feels are unjust. Prison issues and whatnot. So Kamika is one of our trailblazers and trendsetters. PennLive now for the third or fourth year. We've been, for Black History Month, we've been profiling about 30. It used to be young people only. We used to keep it under 40, but now we're more egalitarian. We opened it up to all ages. And really just profiling kind of movers and shakers and emerging leaders in the Black community. And it's become such an honor. It's become the recipients of the honor have helped elevate it, because not only they themselves are such role models and again, really emerging in terms of being a leader, but just sort of now that cachet of, I'm a trailblazer. And in fact, today we have a reception for them. So we have an annual reception with everyone. So it's a really good, it's a good thing. It's a good time.
Lindsay, we have just a few minutes left, but I wanted to touch on the race for Bethlehem mayor. Who's the current mayor, and then who are the other candidates in the race?
Right. So for both Bethlehem and Allentown have mayoral races coming up. J. William Reynolds, he's serving his first term as Bethlehem's mayor and has announced his plans to run again, but he's facing a challenge from city council member Grace Crampsey Smith, and they've kind of been at odds at times over housing issues. I know that Mayor Reynolds has really embraced the idea that Bethlehem needs to build more housing. Bethlehem, does face a shortage of housing. I think, the vacancy rate of housing in Bethlehem is only around like maybe less than 2% versus, an average would be around at least 5% or more. So that really has squeezed, renters here in Bethlehem. He has embraced, building more housing. Grace Cramsey Smith, on the other hand, has, wanted to look at more subsidized affordable housing and, taking caution when, bringing more dense housing to neighborhoods of Bethlehem. So they've been at odds on a couple of issues there. And then on the Allentown side, we have Allentown Mayor Matt Turk, also on his first term, who is running for re-election, facing a challenge from Ed Zuckel, a city council member, and they've, certainly been at odds over a lot of issues. I think housing. I think Ed Zuckel has been critical of Mayor Matt Turk's record on crime, versus Turk has pointed to the fact that crime is down citywide across Allentown. So that will be coming up in November 2025, although the primaries will come up sooner, and both of these races are likely to be decided in the primary. I don't think a Republican has won the mayoral race in quite a long time in either of those cities, and those major candidates are all Democrats. So that will be something I'll be keeping my eye on.
Well, our guests on today's Journalist Roundtable have been Lindsay Weber, a reporter with the Morning Call in Allentown, Aliya Schneider, a reporter with the Philadelphia Inquirer, and Ivey DeJesus, a reporter with PennLive, Patriot News in Harrisburg. Thank you all for joining us. And I'm Phil Beckman. Thank you for watching.